Thank you. And thanks very much for the opportunity to come along and to talk about this process today. Just a little bit of a background to this. Over the last number of years, we have been working with Katrina in the Kids Life and Times to develop modules and questions to be used with young people, with children actively involved in that. So actually it's really lovely to see Emma Holmes here. It's terrible that I'm pointing you out, but one of the first groups that we worked with was a group of children from St Eda's Primary School, who we've gone back to this year. It was the same school, and they worked with us on developing a 14-item measure of children's participation rights in school and community, and it was Emma's class that did that beautifully. It was a wonderful project, and it's lovely to see you here, Emma, in a different capacity, I think, as a CCEA capacity. She's not a plant in the audience, honestly not. And we've also worked with Playboard, for example, to develop some questions around play with their young researchers and with other primary school children as well. So I'm going to talk mainly about the process, and then I'm going to show you some of the findings. If you've got questions about the findings, ask Katrina, because she does the numbers, okay? But just to give a little bit of a background to this particular topic, this was a piece of work that Katrina and myself and Mary Coleman from Public Health were interested in looking at young people's, actually it was their knowledge and awareness and understanding of cancer-related behaviours. So initially in the project, we got some funding from what was the Improving Children's Lives initiative here to do some work around that. You'll see that that has changed into a project that is looking more broadly at their healthy, unhealthy eating and lifestyle choices. And the reason why we did that is, as we worked with the children, they helped us to develop a fabulous set of questions around children's awareness of cancer-related behaviours. But then in discussion with the ARC team and also with the children themselves, we thought that perhaps a big online survey is not the best place to explore those issues with the children, and this is something that we will be pursuing. So just to be aware of that, about how this initially set out. And then what we did is we worked with the children to change their questions ever so slightly to be about more general issues. So this year we've been working with a group of children from St Eda's Primary School in Belfast, and they were in P6 going into P7, so they're about to leave school at this point in time. And we worked with them as an advisory group to help us develop the module of questions for the Kids Life and Times survey. So what I'm going to do is talk mainly about the process. I'm going to talk about how we worked with the children as a research advisory group. And this is based on an approach to research that Laura and I developed years ago now. Yeah, which draws on a children's rights-based approach to research and looks at the active and meaningful involvement of children throughout the research process. I'm going to focus on the strategies that were used in this project to build the young people's capacity to engage with the issues that we were looking at, and how they then contributed to the development of the questions, and also the kind of an early comment on analysis and interpretation, because we're really just at that stage with the young people now. I'll touch briefly on the findings and then let you know what we're going to do next around that. Okay, so the three key components of this approach is to build the capacity of the young people to engage before they help us develop questions, and that also assists them when it comes to analysis and interpretation of findings. Okay. The capacity building stage is very much around helping them engage with, in a sense, what we know. What do we know about the issue? What evidence is already out there? What is the literature saying about it? What are the concepts that underpin these types of issues? And making sure that they have actively engaged with that so that they can construct questions based on that knowledge. So it's a sharing of expertise that you'll see later. And part of that is also about shifting from the subjective to the objective around it. It's not about these young people's experiences, it's about how they can help us ask questions effectively of other young people. So just to give you an idea of some of the strategies that we did there in relation to capacity building. So we spent a couple of sessions with the young people, and initially what we did was we wanted to, in a sense, move from what they know to maybe filling in some aspects around healthy eating and healthy lifestyles that they wouldn't have been as familiar with the unknown. And one of the activities that we did around that, as you can see, we give them paper plates, and we got them to design a healthy meal, an unhealthy meal. We had little activity planners, your weekly planners, and they had to map out what a healthy week would look like and what an unhealthy week would look like. What became very apparent in that is that the young people they know this stuff quite well. In fact, as one child in the group said to me, if we do the Eat Well plate one more time, I'm going to crack up about it. And actually in research that we've been doing in wellbeing, again, similarly, young people are saying to us, we do this over and over again. We know what healthy eating is, and we know what a healthy lifestyle is. What did become apparent from these young people is what they were saying is that they didn't actually really know the reasons for the rules. What they knew is that you're supposed to eat 5 a day or possibly 7 a day. You're supposed to exercise. You're not supposed to do this. But they didn't know why. And they didn't know how that was actually connected to their health. And actually, when we see the findings, I think there's a couple of interesting things, certainly for us involved in education, to consider in relation to how we educate young people about these issues. So that was why when we did this then, we moved on and said to them, well, why do you need to eat healthily? Why do you need to exercise? Why is that good for your body? To try and help them understand that. And that moved us on to the next phase, which was really the expert input. So bearing in mind at this stage, we were beginning initially to look at cancer-related behaviours. So this was very much focused on that. And this is where Marie came in with her expertise. And what we did for this is we did a little short input from her around something like, well, we need to eat vegetables because they've got fibre and they scrub our intestines and they keep them nice and clean inside, which means that reduces the risk of cancer. So she would simply state a particular health-related issue connected to healthy eating or healthy lifestyle, and then we give the children a few minutes just to speed write down anything that they could remember. And what we ended up with was essentially like a graffiti wall of the literature review, okay? Which we then took photographs of, and it meant that they could refer back to that. So in a sense, a combination of the rules, what they knew, and then the reasons for those rules, why we need to do that, built their capacity so that they could start to think about what might be effective questions to ask other young people in relation to this. Because we were interested not in what young people did, but we were interested in what they knew. What did they know and understand? So the next stage then was to work with them to co-construct research instruments. And this is where it's very important to say that this is not just a matter of the children writing the questions and whatever they say goes. It is a matter of us knowing what a good question should look like, and also the experts knowing the key issues to be explored and working with the children to write those questions in a way that their peers would understand and that made sense to them. Okay, and the key thing here is balancing the young people's participation also with the rigour of research and making sure that the questions would be sound enough. So this is how we did that. So there were a few stages to that in the sessions with the young people. So the adults brought their knowledge on the issues under investigation. They also brought their understanding of good rigorous measurement, and there's things that Katrina won't let me do. She does give me an open-ended question every so often, which is a wonderful thing, but they do hate open-ended questions, don't you? And then the expertise of the children, where they can locate these issues into their own experiences and put things in a child-friendly way that are authentic and easily understood. So we got the children into pairs, and with clipboards they started to write some questions and to interview each other based on those questions, and then fine-tune their questions. And then as a group we brought the questions together. I did an initial draft of what they had said, went back to them and refined those, and then the final stage was when the questions were refined, they then went through them as if they were completing them so that they could just tease out any misunderstandings there as well. And that was the point at which we did have a big discussion around the issue of should these questions focus specifically on cancer behaviour, or should they focus more generally on health-related behaviour. Now, actually, at that point, the young people were quite adamant that it should focus on cancer, and their perspective on that was we raise money for cancer in school. We talk about cancer a lot, so it's not something that shouldn't be discussed with children. But then the discussion was around, well, that's okay if you've got an adult who can sit and talk to you about that, but if you've got children going in doing an anonymous survey and online coming out the other end concerned that some of their behaviours or the behaviours of their parents may be cancer related, then we need to consider that. So we've adapted the way we're going to do that. And the questions were changed to be more generally about healthy eating. So that's the research instruments. One of the things that we do as well is that in these modules that we work with the young people to produce them, there's like a little narrative introduction from the young people to the module, where this is what we want to find out. And then we ask the children who have been involved in that if they would put together a statement to support their peers in answering the question. So it's not a test, don't be worried about getting the answer right or wrong. Now this was when we were doing it around cancer. It's really important to answer honestly, and it's okay to say don't know. And that was important too, because we wanted to know what they didn't know as well, okay? And there's a gap there where pictures should be, which I couldn't find, I'm afraid. But what we got the children to do was to draw pictures of themselves with their name underneath it, and we were able to scan those in, and then in the actual Kids Life and Times survey, when this module came up, drawings of the children who had written the questions came up as well, so that the young people knew, young people who were completing the survey knew that these questions had been produced by children their own age. Okay. So, some of the findings, that's a terrible mad table, I must apologise for that. But it's just to give you an idea of the 14 questions that were asked. So there were 14 broad questions that were asked, if you look down the side. And it was in relation to how unhealthy might you be, essentially, if you engaged in some of these activities. And then we had another open-ended question, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we also asked the children, did they think they learnt just enough about this in school, or too much, or too little, to try and get some insight from them as to how they would like to learn about these issues. You'll notice that there's one in there about using a mobile phone, okay? And the children were quite keen that that went in, because they said, our parents constantly tell us, if you use a mobile phone too much, this is what's going to happen to you. So we wanted to know if children were kind of picking up on misinformation about healthy lifestyles. Now, what we did is we still kept in here, not the standard questions about 5 a day, and too much sugar, but also questions that we know are related to cancer, because we wanted to see what the children knew about it. So you can see a range of those questions there. A couple of the things, unsurprisingly, don't know if you can see that highlighted, but unsurprisingly, the big kind of smoking and not exercising enough, the standard things children understood were not going to be good for your health. We did have a minor panic moment in the initial analysis where something had been coded wrong, and it looked like children didn't think smoking was a problem at all. And I had all these theories around it. I was saying, well, it's because of vaping. I bet you it's because of vaping, and they're not thinking like this. So actually then when it was recoded, that was the answer that we got. And I was a bit disappointed, because I had a fantastic theory built up around it. But a couple of the things that sort of became apparent as well was around the things like processed meat. And that's a big message that, in terms of public health, we're trying to get out is in relation to the dangers of processed meat. And that isn't really filtering down to these young people. And also, interestingly, the idea of putting on sun cream on a sunny day. Now, what the children in the advisory group have said is, well, maybe if you were doing this in the summer, because in summer in school we get this drummed into us, and we've our hats and shades days, and we've got our cream and everything, because this survey was done at a different time of the year. One of the things I just want to point out is the third one down about being overweight. And yes, there's a high proportion of children who think that is going to be a problem for your health. But what was interesting is when we analysed the open-ended questions, and I've only a very brief analysis done of this, but we asked the children in an open-ended question to kind of explain their answers, to give us a sense of why they had chosen the answers that they had. And actually on first reading of those, how many? Nearly 4,000? Mm-hmm. On first reading of those 4,000 statements, I actually felt really quite upset reading those statements, because overwhelmingly what the young people were talking about were issues to do with weight and being fat. But not, it's hard to explain it, but when you see the comments, there was definitely something there around a very negative image around that. It was more to do with, if you eat fatty food, you will get fat. If you drink sugary drinks, you will get fat. But there was nothing in those statements that indicated that being overweight was a health issue. Does that make sense? And even if you look at this, they're not really overly identifying being overweight as a major concern in terms of health. It's almost like the being overweight is an outcome of a poor lifestyle. And there were some statements in there that were concerning just about children's general self-esteem around that issue. And so you don't want to do that so you don't get fat, because nobody wants to be fat. Okay? This is especially for Katrina, because Katrina loves a word cloud. Loves a word cloud from open-ended questions. But just to give you an idea of some of the topics that the young people were talking about, I said this idea of being fat, being overweight, was there more as an outcome rather than a health issue in and of itself. Interestingly, an awful lot of young people mentioned issues to do with diabetes. And then, as the advisory group explained, they said, well, that's the kind of emphasis that is taken around eating too many sweets. That's the kind of emphasis that there is there. But cancer did come up. It did come up in their answers about why you would want to avoid certain things. It tended to be connected to issues of smoking and not to other general cancer-related behaviours. So we've still more work to do on that, and we still have more work to do with the young people. In June, we're going to go back to them again and do a little bit more sort of interpretation of the findings, and a little bit more thematic analysis with them of the open-ended questions. And in terms of next steps, as I said, we're going to work more with them, but we are going to follow up this work, and we are going to return to this idea of children's awareness of cancer-related behaviours. And that goes back to my point at the start, to try and help children understand the reasons beneath the rules, not just to repeat back the rules that they've heard, but to actually dig into their understanding of, do they know why we need to do that, and the impact that has on their general health. We will be then piloting the original cancer questions that we had, and we're going to do that in a context where there will be a researcher who will go to the young people, who will pilot the questions that specifically mention the issue of cancer, but that will be followed up by focus group activities and activities in the school to raise awareness of those issues. So that's our next stage. Okay, thank you very much.